Welcome to your custom sim rig. I'm Mark, an engineer, and I've spent the last few years customizing and modifying my rig to do things that I want it to do. My goal is to enable you to modify your rig with information and lessons I've learned along the way. Links are provided below the video for every part I'm going to show and use. In this video, we're going to cover fasteners, toolless fasteners, sliding and rotating parts with a number of best practices that have worked well for me. Let's start by covering a few quick things to avoid any confusion later on. Some of this is basic, but there are some useful nuggets in there. You likely got your profile rig so it would feel solid when you're braking and so you wouldn't lose the feeling of force feedback from your rig through a flexing frame. If you have a 40 series profile rig, the mighty M8x16 bolt gets most of the work done. Why an M8? The shear strength of a grade 10.9 bolt is 3,040 kilograms or 6,700 pounds, well over 3 tons. Even a grade 8.8 bolt can hold 2,120 kilograms or 4,676 pounds, well over 2 tons. So they're a great match for your rigid profile rig. So why 18 millimeters? Well, the first thing that you run into is you have to have, there's 12 millimeters of space between the top and the bottom of the channel inside of your profile. And you have to have enough room to get through your corner braces, which you can see here are about 6 millimeters. This is about 6 millimeters. Some of the other plates are closer to 6 millimeters. And I tend to use 1/4 inch aluminum, which is common in the US, and it's about 6.4, 6.5. So you need to have enough room to get through those things. That's the main reason. Now there's a good reason to inventory a number of these. The bevel head is for flush mount and of course requires a bevel hole. Most of the time that's going to be when you're machining an aluminum part and you want a flush finish, or maybe you're 3D printing something and you don't want anything to stick out. The button head is very useful if you have clearance issues. So the socket head is the most powerful of them. It can take the most torque on it. It takes the largest Allen key. So that's what your go-to is going to be for strength. But let's say that you're mounting something in a corner brace and you have some other fastener coming in from the side, and you find out that having a socket head in there doesn't give you the room that you need in order to make it happen. I've also run into issues with my first set of retractable casters on my rig where the top bolt was near a pivot point, and if I didn't use a ball head, there wasn't enough clearance for the lever to go by as the casters were raising or dropping. So that's why they all exist, and there are links below for all of these. The 3 different types that you see here are stainless steel, which is my personal favorite. I've got a bit of a stainless steel fetish. Your simple plated, zinc or chrome plated, and then your metal oxide. Now, technically, stainless steel isn't quite as strong as the metal oxide, but if you have metal oxide on your rig, depending on the humidity in your area, you'll probably find it'll start to rust up over time. Your mileage may vary on that, but I tend to go with stainless steel, and the links below are to stainless steel just for that reason alone. Now, one other thing that you might notice about these are all M8x16 bolts. And one thing that should jump out to you is that the bevel head has the 16 millimeters including the entirety of the bevel. So there's 6 full millimeters of head there. And that leaves only 10 millimeters of threads, but it's still called an M8x16 bolt. So that's really important to keep in mind. If you're using bevel heads for things, you have to subtract the head out of that. And for all CAD modeling or for bits that you're buying, these bevel heads are all at 45 degrees, so that much is pretty simple. Okay, these bolts work with a number of T-nuts. You've got a captive T-nut, which you probably won't see very often, and I wouldn't really bother with it unless you have a specific need for that kind of that additional surface area. There's the roll-in type with a spring-loaded ball bearing in it. That's the kind that you're going to get with your rig, and that's the kind that most people use, and I do as well. There's also an economy T-nut. I don't really use these much in the single side. I don't see the point, but I will show you later where a double economy T-nut can be very useful in quick release applications. For the roll-in T-nut, putting them in is pretty simple. You just press them down, and I typically like to use a smaller Allen key to just push in there and then pop it into place. And if you want to pop them out easily, just stick your fingernail in there if you have nails adequate to it, and pop it towards you. And once again, you can get a small Allen key in there and rotate it out. So it shouldn't require any special tools to get them in there. And then if you need to move them around once you've got them in there, you can just stick an Allen key in there. So positioning them is no big deal, and they stay placed because of the bearing. While I'm using a bunch of Allen keys, it's probably worth mentioning, if you want a forever set of Allen keys, I highly recommend these Bondhus, the gold plate versions. I've had these forever. They still have crisp corners on them, and the ball ends are great for getting into hard to reach places. I have a link below. I love these things, but that's just a personal preference. So for toolless fasteners, we've got a few types. We've got the lever arm type, and your if you have a SimLab, it probably came with a number of these. These are great in terms of coming in. The M8x16 or actually these are closer to 20, but for the most part you can use them without more than one washer, so those are a really good size. All the lever arms have a press button so that you can rotate them and then get them to a better position. The downside is that you need clearance to spin them, so they don't always fit where you want them, but they're a good solid application. They come in many different sizes, plastic, aluminum, and different lengths. The next fastener that we're going to look at are knobs. So you can see that you can get them in different lengths. I haven't been able to find them much shorter than 30 millimeters. So as a result, you tend to need a spacer with them. So for an application where you want to do a quick release on something that you don't have to torque down too heavily, something like this can work really well. So you can have a knob like this, and put another one over here. Here, I'll grab one of these. And let's say you want to attach it to this thing over here. Well, here you go. Not quite so fun. Still not going in. Oh, got it. This is kind of a pain in the butt, isn't it? Getting these things to line up is just not fun. So let's forget about these for a minute. And let's look at that economy double T-nut I mentioned earlier. These things are fantastic because they give you perfect alignment. And if you have things set up, you simply let them drop down, slide in, and bolt it down. And now you've got a fairly solid connection, and when you want to loosen it up and let it go, you just slide it back. And if this is, in my case on my rig, I use these for parts that don't normally stay on. I use them for my throttles, my collective stick and my flight throttle. And you can just tighten these up and leave them on the rig, so you're not dealing with having a lot of different loose parts. So they can just tighten in place. And then when you want to put the part on, you just loosen them up. And you could bolt it from the underside or the top side. I actually use both in my implementation, and then just slide it in and tighten it down. So these work great. And the next quick release fastener I want to cover are actually bicycle seat quick releases. So you can, this is a 6mm, I don't use that, but you can get them in 8s, and you remove the actual bracket. You need to keep the piece that has the curve in it, and you don't need this either. So some of you have seen my rig, know that I use these on a sliding plate that I have my brake and my clutch mounted to. And I ended up with 1/2 inch spacer and then a certain number of 8mm spaces so that I could get through the 1/4 inch aluminum and then still have the appropriate amount of clearance to get a good purchase on a T-nut. These are good where you want more torque than you can get with the knob, but you still have tight clearance issues. So in my case, I have to fit between my 2 pedals, and I can spin this around until it's tight and then clamp it down, and this allows for a much more torque than you can get turning one of these. And it's also easier to release it if you've got it under a lot of torque than if you have a knob that's tightened down. So yeah, so once again, I use these on my my pedal plates, and at the end of the video I'll show examples of how I'm using these on my rig. Next, I want to briefly cover sliding parts. What I found that works really well is this 2-inch wide UHMW tape. This is something that people have been using in wood shops for ages because you can slide wood against it. I've got some on my shooting board in my shop. I put stuff on various fences because wood and metal slide on it really well. If you've got a black profile frame and you're worried about dinging it up, this is what you want to put at any interface between any 2 pieces of sliding profile. So the way I do it is I peel it back with a little bit hanging over both sides, and then I take a razor blade and cut the edge off. So then you end up with something like this, and if you have a piece sliding across it, it doesn't scour up either side. So you can, so in my case, my my pedal deck can slide backward and forward depending on the length of the driver's legs, and it won't tear up my profile because I've got this on the underside that you can't see, and it slides across on my normal on my frame, and it doesn't leave any marks. So UHMW tape, fantastic stuff. Once again, link below, works great. So next we have rotating parts. Before I get into the profile examples of this, I'm going to cover something that's also useful for profile situations. This is called a ram mount system, and very simply it has 2 1-inch hard rubber balls in it and other fasteners. Now, the fastener I've got mounted to the profile is actually from motorcycles. It's a 9mm angled mount, and I found it's a small size and it fits well on a rig. This is the button box. It's a Derek Spears button box I used to have on my rig before I created my custom mount. But this provides a secure and flexible mount where you can move things around and get it where you're happy with it. And then once you tighten it down really tight, it holds it in place. There's a tiny bit of give to it, but it will hold things in place. So it's good for off the shelf button boxes. One thing I would suggest, I got, and the link below also has this, the round mount for the back. They had a couple holes in this that were recommended for it, but they were mounted low, and it caused the box to flex. So I ended up drilling new holes and mounting the bolts top and bottom to get a more solid mount on this. But the Rambus system works, and for many applications it's a great solution. All right, so now into the profile parts. So I've got three other types of swivel mount systems showing here. The first I want to look at are actually called economy angle clamps, and I always find it interesting when they use economy, which I guess that's supposed to mean that it's something that's a little cheaper than the others, but these things really are very useful. So let's say you've got a let's see, you've got a nice long piece of profile, right? And let's say you want to adjust it around a bit. I'll show you how I use this on my rig later, but I use this for my sequential shifter. But this is great for anything that's, you know, coming off of perpendicular, where you've got a wider piece of profile with at least 2 slots. I'm using 3 for my sequential shifter. It's because it's the wheel mount side brackets. But you can see how these make it pretty easy. And once you snug this down, it gives you a pretty solid mount. It's not going to be quite as strong as a corner brace, but corner braces can be a little bit of a pain in this regard, because in order to slide something around, you have to loosen 4 sets of bolts, and they just don't move as easily. And these are very, very simple and easy to move around, so you can get things exactly where you like it, and then just snug it down and you're done. So like I said, these things are great. Economy angle clamps, link below. The next thing I want to cover is a more complicated swivel mount. It's a pivot mount, or pivot joint. They're configurable. You can set the slot orientation by putting in pieces like this, and they tend to hold in place better than that one does. The others are holding pretty well, and these are marked 8 or 10, having to do with the width of the slot. So for 40 series, you'll always have the small 8 showing towards you. And the way this one's configured, you can see it's horizontal on one and vertical on the other. What I had on my rig was something where there's a piece mounted to the front here, and then another piece mounted here, and then you can adjust the angle between them. The other place that I'm using this is on the side of my wheel supports, or the main vertical profile, and I have 2 of these connected off of a piece of angle. So actually the angle is bolted to the profile, and then this is bolted to that, and then there's a plate that mounts to the handbrake. And what I can do is semi-tighten those, and then sit in the seat and pull the brake lever and get the alignment with my shoulder perfect, and then go back and tighten these bolts. So you can see the pivots tighten and loosen on the sides here. So you have both the orientation inserts, and you have a clamping mechanism for the hinge to lock it into place. Now, this is not going to take a huge amount of torque. So, for example, if you tried to use this to hold a brake pedal, you'd probably push on it and bend it over. But for something like a handbrake, at the angle all the stress I'm going at is perpendicular, and I've already got it lined up with the direction of force, so that hinge has no problem in the application I'm using it for. The last part has an interesting name. These are frequently listed as structural pivot assembly with single or dual straight arms. And you can see there's threads in the side for arms to hook in. And the thing you'll notice about these is they're also keyed. So you can see one of these is horizontal and one's vertical. So you have to be careful when you order these to make sure that you're getting the part that works for you. I'm not actually using these on my rig at the moment. I am using the arms that come off of it to strengthen things. I've got one on the side of my flight stick to strengthen it. So as a first example of these fasteners in practice, this has two knobs and one of those dual economy Tnuts, and all you do is slide it in. And there you go. You have a solid mount for your, well, in this case, my flight throttle. And just loosen the knobs up, slide it back, and you're done. And then you can just tighten these up so they don't vibrate on your rig when you're not using them. And there's no loose parts. This shows the use of a couple economy angle clamps down here, and so I can very easily just loosen that slightly and adjust the fore aft or the angle of my sequential shifter. So it's in place solid and works like a champ, and it's very easy to adjust. Just loosen two bolts, but I don't do that enough to make sense to use knobs in that application, but for this it works beautifully. So in this application you can see where the pivot joints are holding my handbrake. So I can very easily semi-tighten those, then get back in a seated position, pull back, and get the alignment perfect. So it lines up with my shoulder. I've done similar things with my stick. It's actually canted down and in towards me a little bit, but I actually did that by modifying the aluminum plate. But the shoulder arm alignment is very close to being perfect. So here you can see another pivot being used in conjunction with a sliding piece in the back and a plate that can slide fore aft. So this allows me to set the throttle angle independently of the other pedals. So in this case, I added a little more angle to it and slid the pedal back a little bit to make it work properly for me. I've gone through a lot of effort to get my pedals oriented to fit the right way. Another thing that you can see here is the use of the quick releases from the bicycle seats. So these are in here. Once again, they're going through a 1/4 inch of aluminum plate. They've got one washer and 1/2 inch spacer, normal Tnuts inside, and so these can now slide. So I'm going to loosen them all the way. They can slide out of the way, so I can use GT driving with left foot braking in a very comfortable position for my left foot. And it locks down here, and then when I push it back, it hits a stop. So I have a small button head bolt and a T-nut, obviously, to set where the stop point is. That's something else that I use in a lot of places. Here I'm using the straight arms from the side of the structural pivot assembly. I actually had to grind the corner off because it's square on one side and rounded on the other as it comes from 80/20, but I ground that so that I could pivot on both sides. And in this case you can see I've got a couple dome head bolts in here, so I have access to the channel head screws there and they don't run into each other. As you can see, this pedal rest can slide backwards and forward, and I can adjust the angle of it, so if I make any tweaks to my rig, this can always fit in the right place. Future attractions include working with aluminum in a wood shop, what tools you need to get the alignment necessary to use profile rigs, some best practices there. 3D printing, not everything that's involved in 3D printing, but designing parts to fit on a rig specifically, and the fasteners involved. Also mounting transducers and routing cables and a few other things that as we go. So that's the current plan. see how this happens. It could go in a bunch of directions at this point, and I assume I'll get some guidance from the community if this grows a community. Later.